welcome to In the Corner, the place where every cricketer wants to be. I'm your host, Callum Doug, and thank you so much for tuning in again to the podcast. Apologies for being a little bit late with this video. Lewis and I have been extremely busy, but we are here to talk about the fifth test between India and England, as well as do a full-on series review. But joining me, as I've said, is Lewis Dade. Louie, how are you, mate? Thanks for coming on the podcast again.
Going very well, Callum. Cricket season is sadly coming to an end here in Australia, but there's plenty of things upcoming and lots to look forward to as well.
Absolutely, mate. We've just had this 5-test series between England and India. We've had the test series against New Zealand as well. Looking forward to the IPL, which will be kicking off in a few weeks. And obviously the English summer of cricket will be making a more of an effort to cover here on the podcast. But overall, it was a pretty anticlimactic end to the series, and India were able to wrap up the series in the fourth test match in Ranchi. But unfortunately, England were not able to take advantage, I should say, of a lovely batting wicket in Dharmashala, getting bowled out for 218. And Kuldeep Yadav was really the star of the show, as well as Ravi Ashwin in his 100th test, taking 4 in the first innings and then 5 in the second innings. So it was a fantastic effort from him. Sadly, not the end of the series that we were hoping, but overall, I still thought it was a very entertaining series of Test cricket, despite the scoreline reflecting India were the better side in the scheme of things. And I think there's positive things for both teams, but I certainly think that from an Indian point of view, there was a lot to like. What did you make of the last Test match, mate?
I think it was consummating what was in the end a very dominant series for India. I think this series probably went the way, we all probably overreacted a bit to the first test, but I think on the whole, from an Indian perspective, it's probably not been talked about enough that this wasn't their ideal batting lineup. And at the end of the day, this they've had to try a lot of new players, young players, and to come out with a pretty comprehensive win, I think is very strong purely from their perspective. The bowlers, again, I mean, we saw some signs of depth. I think bowling-wise, Kuldeep Yadav is far and away the revelation of this series from them. To my knowledge, two relatively inexperienced quicks got to go. One much better than the other. And then obviously, we know Ashwin and Jadeja are good. We know Bumrah is good. It's great to see Bumrah out there and playing a fair bit of cricket. But I think India will be pretty happy with how they walk away from this series.
Absolutely. Yeah, I originally sort of predicted at the beginning of the series that India would win 4-1, which ended up being the scoreline. But yeah, I felt like after the second test match in particular, we felt that the two sides were a lot closer in the scheme of things. But however, India were able to assert their dominance. I think they found a good balance of pitches that were enough to be in their favour in terms of their spinners, but also not be typical flat tracks that the English batting lineup could dominate on. So I think they found the balance in the pitches, but at the same time there was some poor batting from an English point of view, and particularly in the first innings at Dharmashala, where Bairstow, Root, and Stokes fell 3 for none and burned all 3 reviews. That was a key moment in the game, and Kuldeep just did the damage, and I'm so happy for him. I feel like he's deserved this opportunity for such a long time. I feel like he's been harshly dealt with by selectors in India, particularly in the test setup, and the reluctance to play wrist spin in the subcontinent conditions has, I think, all been unjustified. If they're a good spinner, they'll spin the ball in those conditions, and I think his accuracy in this series as well has been pretty spectacular as well. But what did you make of England's performance, particularly with that batting collapse in the first innings, and they were obviously well behind in the game?
I think the concern from England once again is that, and it's the same concern they had when McCullum took over and when Bazball started, is that I think horse for horse they don't have the batting talent talent for talent when they go up against Australia and they go up against India. They are just a bit short in that department. Obviously Root was able to come back and find some form worth, certainly considering the fact that I think a lot of people don't talk about the fact that he was asked to bowl a lot early on in the series, and that may have also affected his batting form. Uh, Ollie Pope, as much as it wasn't a poor series, I don't think England. I think England would have actually preferred to see him score his 315 runs in more steadier scores than one innings followed by basically 100 runs for the remainder of the series. I think it's time to potentially look at moving on from Bairstow, and this may give them a chance to do so. Uh, they'll like what they got from their openers. I think, given the spinners available to them, they'll actually be okay with those returns. They won't be concerned about their fast bowling attack because they'll go back home and conditions will suit. So, wasn't a ton of positive from an English perspective, other than I think at the end of the day their openers remained effective, and they found a couple of spinners that may, for 3 or 4 years from now, whenever they visit India again, be helpful in a more competitive side.
Yeah, I certainly think that there's positives from both sides, and we'll touch on the depth in Indian cricket a bit later. But I think the fact that Bashir and Hartley have played so limited first class cricket, as you said, those returns are pretty spectacular. And the fact that Bashir's been able to take a 5 wicket haul, um, I really like what he's doing. I don't know whether how effective he's going to be in English conditions. I certainly hope that him and Hartley get more opportunities to play county championship. And Brendan McCullum, following the fifth Test matches, asked the counties to give the opportunities to those spinners. And I just think the loss of Jack Leach was just so critical for this particular series. I think his control. I think Hartley started to get really tired towards the end of the series, and I think we touched on that in one of the previous podcasts that we did for this series. Um, but yeah, I don't think you could have asked any more of the two of them. I don't think you could have asked any more of Anderson and Wood. But yeah, it was just simply the fact that the batters were pretty inconsistent. Crawley finishes leading run scorer for them in the series. And in some innings he looked really good. I thought Duckett, showed a lot of promise, and I certainly think he's worth sticking with. Ollie Pope is the one for me, as you mentioned, that big booming double hundred in the first game, and then barely seen since then, and wrote 100 in the third Test match. Um, it was a little bit too late, unfortunately. And Stokes, after the first Test match, he was pretty poor with the bat as well. And it was good to see him bowl again. And take a wicket. He hadn't bowled for 200 and something days since his knee surgery. So, yeah, certainly positive signs for England in the bowling department. The batting department, not so much. But I think Ben Folkes deserves a little bit of credit as well. Um, he didn't have an outstanding series, but I certainly think he kept well. I think England need to stick with him as the long-term wicketkeeper. None of this going back to Bairstow and playing your batters stuff. I think it's time to move on from that, and I think he should be the keeper in this team for the next 10 years. What are your thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree more about needing to move on from Bairstow. I'm okay if another keeper comes up, or I'm okay to have another look at Ollie Pope as a keeper. I'm a bit skeptical about that in difficult conditions. I do think that, yeah, folks' batting average is probably victimised a little bit by the fact that his middle order didn't really do their job. So often England were having good starts. I mean, again, you mentioned both openers had relatively good series with the bats, and then often there was little, mini collapses, and folks was having to come in that situation, and that does come into consideration. Anyone that's ever batted 7 or 8 knows there's a big difference between coming in against a tired attack that's had to work hard for their wickets versus attack that's on a roll. Keeping wise, he had a very good series. It's never easy to keep over there. I think where he'll potentially struggle is England, much like wanting spinners that can bat to bolster their batting. I think they do tend to look at their keeping as needing to provide them some batting to cover up weaknesses. But I think he's been underrated his whole career, and has also, if you look at his test record, he's played most of his tests in difficult conditions, which does affect folks' overall average and brings it down to probably what it would be if he played more cricket in England.
Yeah, and I think as well, Bairstow, was able to get to 100 Test matches, and that's a phenomenal achievement. But I don't think there's ever been a player, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Johnny Bairstow, but I don't think there's been ever such an inconsistent player to reach 100 Test matches. And I think this might be a good opportunity for England to be able to move on from him. And whether Harry Brook's available for the English summer, I feel will be one of the biggest determining factors into whether they choose to stick with him. And I think it would be good for England to get a few younger guys around the squad. Most of their squad's 30 plus. So I do think that there needs to be a few young faces help to rejuvenate what they've got going on. But as you said, I think when they go back home to their regular conditions, that will cover up a few of the cracks that we've seen in this series. Louis, I want to touch on whether Bazball has been exposed. And I feel like there's obviously a time and a place to play the aggressive cricket. Uh, I still think it's laughable that Ben Duckett's come out and said that England invented aggressive batting. The Australian sides over the years gone by have, been the leaders in aggressive batting. Going at 4 runs and over plus. Um, do you think this is a reality check that Bazball needed to potentially change some things? And saying that, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see this tested against quality opposition until England play against India in 2025. And no disrespect to the West Indies and the Sri Lankan sides that will be touring England this year, but is this a good reality check for them?
I think it should be. I think with the way this team conducts itself, I don't know if it actually will be in actuality. Um, I do think the way Joe Root was allowed to bat within his more traditional style when he scored his 100 was a small recognition of that. But my gut feel is that Stokes and McCullum will compartmentalise that as something that needed to happen in India, but that this tactic will still work in the UK. I don't be shocked if the West Indies pip a test off the Poms as well at some point in time if they can take a healthy bowling attack. I think that the concerning thing is I don't think it is going to be a factual reality check. We all knew what Bazball was, which is if you think you're the lesser talented team, by bringing higher variance into the game, you increase your chances of winning. I have no issue with them taking that approach. Let's be honest, this series they weren't winning if they played conventional cricket, right? So in these kind of series, I don't have an issue with it. I think this is not necessarily going to become an actual reality check. That being said, this series and the Ashes will be held against Stokes and McCullum if they disappoint in this home summer. I think Bazball is a lot more fragile than what they want it to appear to be as far as a strategy and a tactic. And you're 100% right. They're blatantly ripping off what's been done for years. I mean, it was Richie Beno back in the 60s that set his New South Wales team a target of a minimum of 300 runs, right? This is not revolutionary cricket. This is just an all-time marketing ploy. And I'm all for it. But at the same point in time, I think this is massively overblown. And I think the longer they do it, the more issues will be exposed in that style of cricket.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I could agree with you more, mate. I do want to touch on the depth of Indian cricket, and it just continues to amaze me. The Indian cricket factory, as we call it. Um, Lots of exciting debutants. I know Patidar didn't probably have the first 3 Test matches that he was really hoping, but I certainly think he'll get an opportunity in the future. Safraz Khan, Jarrell, Akash Deep. I felt like there was just so much positivity with the young guys coming in. They were able to seamlessly step up and do a job. But you talk about Jaswal at the age of 21. Jesus, kid's got some talent. And I know we've said that previously, but he just continues to amaze me. I would love to see how these kids go in Australian conditions, and I certainly think that this Indian team is up to the challenge of coming to Australia, which we'll touch on towards the end of this video. But what did you particularly like from the Indian youngsters that were able to come through, and which of them could you potentially see doing some proper damage in Australia?
I think what was good and I'm going to focus more on the batting because the reality is we saw a lot more of the batting depth in the factory than what we did the bowling. Is that I like that there was a lot of different styles of cricketers, right? Jaiswal is aggressive, but in quite a classical way. Gill is relatively well, he's a modern day conventional number 3. I know he's a positive cricketer, but in the modern game, someone like Safraz Khan is unconventionally positive. And then you've got guys like Padikal. I think even if you look at, if we talk from a bowling perspective, I did like what I saw from Akash Deep. At the end of the day, I'm not sure Mukesh Kumar's going to play a lot more Test cricket, and he's obviously a little bit on the older side as well. They'll be happy to see Rohit Sharma, let's call it return to form. And meanwhile, they only had got one test out of KL Rahul, no test out of Virat Kohli. I think Shreyas Iyer is in seriously hot water. He can't be getting bounced out in Ranji Trophy games. And at the end of the day, that's his own issue. But batting wise, it's great. I would have loved to see more of the bowling lineup. I think you talk about Australia. There's a lot of overs that have to go into the legs here. And credit to India, they have beaten Australia with a third-rate bowling lineup before. Only recently within Australia, but that's probably the one point of concern. I don't think all of them are going to light on fire in Australia. I think Jaiswal is the obvious candidate for who's going to succeed. If Australia are fit and firing, I think Shubman Gill is going to have a good but not great series. I think it's a bit flip of the coin in the middle order. I'll be level with you. I'm really not sure with Khan and Padikkal and some of these guys what to expect if they play consistent cricket here in Australia.
Yeah, I think that you raised some really valid points about the batting lineup. Yeah, I'm not sure whether Akash is on the plane to Australia and Kumar. Yeah, I would agree that I think there's other pacers who would be ahead of him in the lineup, particularly with Mohammad Shami expected to come back into the lineup for Australia. So you'd think Bumrah, Siraj, and Shami would be your three starting quicks, and whoever makes their squad on top of that is a bonus. So yeah, I think the batting lineup will be scary in Indian conditions. Obviously, I think the true judge of whether these players are going to succeed is when they do come out to Australia, or when they go and play against England with a Duke ball, or even in South Africa as well, where they've got those real seamer-friendly conditions that they have to face. I think that's going to be the true test. And yeah, I thought it was good that Padikkal got a go. Probably batting a little bit lower than he normally does in first-class cricket, but we've seen what he's been able to do in the IPL initially with RCB, and now transitioning over to the Rajasthan Royals. I think that's really exciting for India going forward. As we move ahead, we're looking forward to the Australian series, and we're really going to try and make an effort here on the podcast to cover that series in as much detail as possible. But I think India seriously have a strong chance in Australia. I think it would be a tight series like last time. But I love the depth of the Indian fast bowlers. I think Bumrah has improved in leaps and bounds since he was here last time. The way that Bumrah has been able to set up batsmen as well, and I think Australia's got a seriously fragile batting lineup, particularly in the top order. For those of you who watched our New Zealand review, Usman Khawaja looked quite jumpy. If you were a fast bowler, you'd be licking your lips at the chance to bowl to Steve Smith with a new ball and really bring that LBW into play. And Marnus looks a shell of himself compared to what he was a couple of years ago. The lack of energy at the crease. I know he scored a 90 first innings in Christchurch, but the Australian top six, there's been one person who's been able to get them out of jail, and the only time that they weren't able to do that was in Brisbane, where Shamar Joseph was absolutely able to clean up. And I know Smith carried his bat and got 91 not out, but based on what I've seen of him as an opener, I don't think that's going to be happening. Well, I personally wouldn't go that way, but just depends how Australia wants to structure the boys' club, as I like to call them. What are your thoughts about that?
So generally on that series coming up, obviously next summer here in Australia, I think at the moment it's 50-50 odds, flip a coin. I will say to be the devil's advocate to your arguments around India being potentially a favourite is that one, there's a lot of assumptions around health of the bowling attack. Bumrah hasn't played Test cricket consistently for quite some time now, and he is such a big part of how I evaluate that series. Shami's obviously on the older side, and he's been balding for the best part of a decade now. I don't know what that means. Would like to see that birth certificate, but there's a few other guys there where you go, okay, if they end up playing a third test and they're opening the bowling with Akash, for example, then no, I don't think they're going to be competitive. That being said, if they're fully healthy, you are bang on. This top order in Australia is vulnerable. I think it's in Australia's best interest to potentially get a bit radical with selections for that test match because it is easy to play it safe now with a long, Marner scored probably just enough in that last test to justify it. And as you mentioned, Smith has not looked great, but did score 90 not that long ago. Travis Head is been our match winner. Kawaja's had a really good kind of 24 months prior. So it's easy for Australia to justify going in unchanged. Alex Carey scoring runs is important. I think if both sides are fully healthy, I think India are marginal favourites. That being said, if India aren't healthy, this can change very quickly. And I think we know Lyon and whichever spinner they play are probably going to balance each other out. That's the other part of it, though, is if India don't have confidence in the quicks available to them, they can go double spinner. They really want to. They could get really out of the box and go triple spinner. But then they're at the mercy of the decks being served up by the groundskeepers. I mentioned to you off air, I'd really like to see a young Ollie Davies get a look, as kind of rogue as that might seem. But I think Australia have to be quick to make changes if they don't win the first couple of test matches.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk post this New Zealand series about um, whether Smith's the right man to open, and I don't necessarily think the answer is Smith, one of Smith, Bancroft, um, Marcus Harris or Matthew Renshaw. I think we've seen what particularly the last three I just mentioned can do, and I don't think it's enough to give me hope or confidence. There's been talk about Travis Head trying to go up the order and become the next David Warner. There's been talk about Fraser McGurk opening in Test cricket, which I don't think he's at the point of his career where that's even an option. He's not even a lock in the South Australian lineup at this point, as much as we'd all love for him to play Test cricket. If he's going to play Test cricket, it's going to be in a Glenn Maxwell style where he bats at 5 or 6 and really tries to take down an attack that's tiring. So, I think Nathan McSweeney is someone else who could be, on the fringes of this Australian lineup. He's captain Australia A, got a really good 100 against Tasmania in the Shield on an absolute green top down there, a Beck Westcombe down wicket. So, um, yeah, I think there are options for Australia. It's just whether they're brave enough to pull the trigger. So I've still got India favourites, as you said, very much contingent on the health of the fast bowlers. And the really positive thing for India as well. KL Rahul played one Test match. I think he made an 80 odd from memory. Virat Kohli didn't even play in this series, so hopefully those two are going to be available for the IPL and obviously get some form, because I think Australia we just need really good contests in Test cricket. We've seen the last couple of summers it's been very lackluster, and that's no disrespect to West Indies, South Africa, and Pakistan that have toured. I know they've pushed the games at times and made it a little bit close for comfort, but um, I think as an Australian cricket fan and just a world cricket fan, people are licking their lips at the prospects of this series and what could be on offer. So, yeah, Louis, I just wanted to say a big thank you for coming on In the Cordon again. It's always great to have you on the podcast, and I'm very thankful that you're able to share our insights with our viewers tonight.
It's been a pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to a good IPL, a bit of time to rest and reset around the Australian side, and potentially get my teeth in some county cricket shortly as well.
Absolutely, and we'll certainly be looking to do some IPL content in the lead up to that tournament and do a podcast similar to this for those matches coming up. But make sure that you're following In the Cordon on all of your major social media pages and your podcast platforms, and we'll see you on the next video. Cheers.